Yeah, hi, my name's James. I'm a recovered drug addict. Thank you for inviting me to share at this meeting at your home group. Anybody that's new to Cocaine Anonymous or back from a relapse or just in this, hi to everybody, welcome, and thanks again for having me to talk around step one. Stephen asked me to share on step one, or the first step. Well, actually, if I look into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says and it states that we learn that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were real alcoholics. This is the first step in recovery. I'm not trying to be tricky, but it's I had to understand and find out some stuff through some experimentation. To be receptive, to be cornered, to snuff out the last flick of the conviction that I could do this job myself within my own sobriety. And I'm really going to try and keep this simple, but I apologise if I sound like I've swallowed a big book. I'm not meaning to come across that way. I have swallowed a big book, but I have got my own mind. It's just it becomes ingrained and entrenched in how I talk and how I communicate within Cocaine Anonymous. It's just the way it is. Interestingly, looking at step one and being asked to share about step one, step one is experiential. It's something that we can't educationally come to terms with as such. It's experiential as a result of being smashed to bits as a result of the desperate experiment of the first drink or drug, and understanding and learning through our own experience that our human resources and our own human power at certain times can do anything to prevent that first drink or drug or to prevent relapse. And that came about for me through many years of experimentation and trying to beat the game and swearing off and it happening again and me being confused, baffled, misunderstood, trying to justify the reasons or the excuses or the plausible alibis why I'd picked up that first one. And for some years, things seemed to make sense because I'd not really lost the power of choice. Yeah. So the alibis and justifications may just be enough just to sort of get people off my back. But there was a point, and for me, that personally came in two forms. It came through crack cocaine, combined with heroin, and understanding that my concept of addiction was completely wrong. So my ideas of addiction were, which seemed to make sense to me, were the physical addiction to a substance. And that's what really cornered me in my own ego deflation or I don't know, there was something with me and cocaine and crack cocaine, especially when I started smoking crack cocaine in the 90s in the jungle scene that I was in, and there was lots of Versace and Moschino and this whole imaginary gangster syndrome stuff going on, yeah, that I was part of, that I believed to be in part of a criminal fraternity, that I looked at addiction as if it was heroin or the guy drinking Frosty Jacks, or it would have been Thunderbirds in them times on the park bench. However, I did become that person, and so seeing that I thought physical addiction to a substance was the problem, I could eventually use my own resources to escape that problem of the physical addiction to a substance, and that went from being a habitual cocaine addict at 18, 19, 20, seeing that the alleged glamorous lifestyle that came with that the escape that I would need to seek then at 21 was to go to the Priory and meet Kate Moss, yeah, to the point where I was 36 and found Cocaine Anonymous found me, somebody working their 12-step talking about step one, and caught my attention was I put myself into an institution 10 times by that point, escaping the so-called physical addiction or what I believed addiction to be. However, I would taper off, escape the physical addiction to a substance, if we call it heroin, and I would start to reassemble and recreate my life. And of course, don't misconstrue me when you've lost everything, separated yourself from your family, and say, for me at that point, not seeing my daughter for 7 years, right? I didn't feel very good about myself, and I didn't feel very happy. Of course, that's called trauma. I think anybody that went through those kind of experiences with the destruction and the carnage that one causes, in me particularly in my sprees, I'm left with, I've got a conscience with time in a prison cell to think about and reflect on the things that I'd done, and I wasn't very happy about it. I wasn't reveling in that at all. And I would swear off and really, really mean it. That, like, for me, drugs and alcohol turns out bad, and I'm never going to do it again. Yeah, I'm not on about what I was saying when I was 19 after a fucking weekend on the Yayo and a few brandy and cokes. We've really exhausted all that, and we're on a whole different scenario. And so, it shouldn't have been possible for me to pick up that first one again with my own power, my own resources. Should say, no, do not put your hand on the hot stove. It burns. Yeah, and it actually even sticks to the hob for a long time, because I feel the pain and suffering of my addiction. It's deep, it's ruthless, it's brutal. And I'm not trying to say that to make myself sound like the worst addict in the world. I'm not, because it's all relative to whatever we go through, whatever we're involved in with our addiction. It's relative to us. But the pain and suffering for me and the people around me was so significant. And actually, I knew better, in the sense of I'd had a good education, I'd been brought up well, I'd worked, I was in London in 17, 18 and 19 and working in, I went from financial institutions to Majesty's institutions, but within that I kind of had a lot of delusion. I thought I was something I wasn't. I'd go in as a 9-stone heroin addict, put a little bit of weight on, and come out thinking I was John Gotti. Yeah, there was a lot of that sort of stuff that went on. Sure, but by the end of it, I'd been broken and humbled enough by this experience of the chronic relapse condition that was going on for me. I just thought, I didn't understand it. I really didn't get it, why it was going on. And to the point where, the first port of call when I was in an institution was to ring mum. Hi, how you doing? Oh God, James, what's happened again? What happened? To the point where I said, I don't know. I wasn't thinking. And she loved that answer, didn't she? Yeah, that's typical of you, James. But it was the truth. At a certain time, at that point of relapse or having no effective mental defense, the thought or the severity of the consequence did not crowd into my mind to deter me from picking up that first one. And that came along in 1,000,001 different guises and forms. It could come on, well, you've been clean for a bit, you can drink red wine like a gentleman. So that's quite subtle, because red wine hadn't really got me in a lot of trouble in the past. It ended up being trouble, but I'd forget that and then start on that spree with the red wine and cocaine. I came out once swearing that I'm going to be a rasta, so to speak. I'm just going to smoke the weed. And that got to the point when I was smoking a bit of weed, a couple of diazepam, and then I thought, with the diazepam, well, actually I can smoke crack like a gentleman now, because I've got some diazepam to come down with. Then it was just coming out and smoking crack and a couple of Zoppy clones just to bring myself off, to taper off. And then it felt good idea just to have some heroin, but in a spliff and not in a pin or on the foil, because that last time that burnt me. So all these experiences that went on with experimentation, the desperate experimentation of the first one, and it came in 1,000,001 different forms, where sometimes I felt really bad before I picked up the first one, and sometimes I felt really fucking happy, joyous and free before I picked up the first one, because I'd escaped the bondage of self, of being in that terrible cycle, that crippling, from living in a relatively nice home back in the day to now sleeping homeless in a Coventry in a squat or a garage. There's just no comparison. And I want to try and take it back to the book. So we're talking about conceding. This is the first step in recovery. Cool. So it's looking at that, and the point of step one is to show the newcomer, or to converse or talk about the newcomer with their experiences, to match your experiences, to see if they identify, or to break down and smash that delusion, because we're very, I'll speak for myself, quite stubborn, believe that I could always do it my way, and it was only when I came to a certain point where I was receptive to what you guys were talking about. I've been a member of Cocaine Anonymous now for about 6.5 years. And one could say, I could talk about, I came into Cocaine Anonymous and I never used again. It's true. That was my experience, just because of, for me, it happened to be that Cocaine Anonymous was the last house on the block, and that just happened to be where I was receptive. However, our experience says of being within these meetings that the whole point of talking about step one is to show the newcomer who is relapsing within Cocaine Anonymous and has relapsed prior to Cocaine Anonymous, to help them identify with this condition if they suffer with that condition. And it's the point of trying to snuff out, reveal methods and strategies that have worked, or maybe looking at where they haven't worked, to help them come to an understanding of this quicker, sooner rather than later. Hopefully, we can provide an even greater service, and within that service, it gives examples. So the chapter more about alcoholism is so instructive, and it's so informative, and it's so revealing, and it's something that I've been talking about step one for almost nearly 6.5 years. My daily life is consisted of talking about step one. I'm in this and looking at it, and relapse is so unpredictable, and it's unpredictable. It's, what was the other word I used? Unexplainable. It's unexplainable. It doesn't make sense how it could happen again. And obviously the whole purpose of step one is looking at and discussing to enable somebody to identify, to see that their own resources have failed them. I'm just looking at the time. To obviously move on with the rest of the 12 steps. And I'm only here to talk about step one, but this is the whole purpose, and looking at when somebody is in a hopeful place to show where, for example, we can look at Bill Wilson on page 5. He says, and we can look at people that come into Cocaine Anonymous for the first time, and you can see that they become hopeful, or they think they've got it, and we know that's necessarily not to be always true, and it talks about a hopelessness within this book, and it's not that I'm a hopeless human being, I'm just hopeless within my own resources to prevent anything, or to prevent this happening to me. Like, relapse happens to me, not because of me. So it says, Bill Wilson says on the bottom of page 5, I woke up, this had to be stopped. Desire to stop drinking. Says that in one of the preambles, or in the traditions, all that's required, short form mine, is a desire to stop drinking. Now, I've had many desires, but it wasn't enough. I could see that I could not take so much as one drink. So I saw, in one of my latter times incarcerated, I've got it, it's the first one. I saw it. I'd not seen that before, but I came to the understanding that I could see that the first one was the one that did the damage, particularly if you look at, heroin, because of the physicality of it. It's like you use it once, day 2 you used again, and you're in it again, and it's game over. If you want to look at the phenomenon of craving, or just that the opiates are very addictive and they change something within your mind, it's a whole different thing. And he says, I was through forever. Before then, I'd written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. I meant business. Shortly afterwards, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Mental blank spot. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I'd taken it. Was I crazy? And that's what I looked at within myself. I thought, what's fucking wrong with you, James? I didn't want to do this anymore, yet I found myself in it again. I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed to be near just being that. Renewing my resolve, renewing his own power, his own resources. However, he's just seen that his own resources didn't work, yet he's going to try harder not to pick up that first one. I tried again. Some time passed, a period of dormancy, period of sobriety, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. For me, that would more look like, not cocky, it'd be more like nonchalance, like casual. I'd forget about how bad it was and I'd just be continuing on gently with my life, forgetting actually you had this real problem that you swore that you were never going to do again, and now I was a little bit more casual about it. But there was no fight, I wasn't hanging on for dear life. I didn't feel like that when I was clean. Yeah, after a period of time I'd straighten out and feel cool. He says I could laugh at the gym meals. Now I had what it takes. So that'd be me standing on the prison banister, leaning over, seeing the guy that got released 3 weeks before saying he's never going to do it again. He's done. He's going to hopefully and move forward with his life. And then 3 weeks later, he walks back. He's lost 2 stone in a week with his tail between his legs. And I'm like, he's fucking done it again. Why would he do that? Why would you do that? And the humiliation of that. And then 3 weeks later, 6 months later, when I went out, exactly the same thing would happen to me and I'd feel humiliation and broken again. So he says, one day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, he wasn't saying that I felt really bent out of shape, things weren't going well for me, so I went into a cafe for a cup of coffee to take the edge off. I'm not saying that's not the case sometimes, but he wasn't saying that. He just goes, I went into a cafe to call a friend, and in no time, bang, he was beating himself. He was beating on the bar, asking himself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself, illusion of power, I would manage better next time. But I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. And that's experience for me too. But however, I had a choice in that. I knew that once I picked up the first one, I'm gone anyway. There's no stopping it. He says the remorse, horror and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. Well, they are if you're an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, because you will forget that. You will forget the consequences. You will forget the 4 horsemen: terror, frustration, bewilderment and despair. Yeah. Unless you've used again, then you'll feel them again and swear off again. So I hope I've tried to be really clear and concise within this and give a little bit of myself within this conversation, this talk, man. And it is, a pleasure to be able to do this in Cocaine Anonymous. It says within step 1, we admitted. So first and foremost, if you come in and you just looked at step 1 and said, I admit that I'm powerless, yeah, that doesn't mean that you really have conceded. It just means that you've said that, and it really helps to really look at, say, I didn't want to get too technical, but if you're going to more about alcoholism, look at Jim, look at Fred, look at the Jaywalker, look at Bill's story, look at Dr. Bob, look at periods of sobriety and relapse, and really break that down. Look at the things that you've done to try and prevent this from happening again, and it's happened again, to see that maybe you do have this condition, the real alcoholic, the true alcoholic, as described in the big book, and then you can make a beginning. Or if you're working with others, it's just a great opportunity to become more effective within that. That is my primary purpose, to talk about step 1. That doesn't mean There's other conversations that don't go on the side. It doesn't mean there's not been a process of inventory, prayer, meditation, an amends process and all that kind of. As a result of doing that stuff, I had a vital spiritual experience. Yeah. I don't work my program. The steps have taken me and put me in a position of neutrality, and I'm just simply here for the new guy. That's where I'm at. It's cool. We admitted we were powerless over relapse. Yeah, that's what we're really talking about. No power to prevent that. Powerless over relapse. That our lives became unmanageable. So our lives became unmanageable as a result of the peculiar mental twist of the mental black spots. And we can say, if you want to throw the phenomenon of craving in there. So relapse is unpredictable as a result of the unpredictability of my relapse and the phenomenon of craving, or the spree, if you want to call it that. My problems pile up and I can't sort them out. Unmanageability. It doesn't mean being unmanageable sober. Yeah. People may say that, and I'm not here to say that they're wrong. Yeah. Or am I? No, I'm not. But it's what it's talking about. Step one is step one. It's a result of cause and effect. And don't get me wrong, at the end of my, sounds glamorous, my using career, mate, it was definitely not that. You know, running around, you know, my world was isolated to, can I say this? A hostel. I was going to say a Salvation Army hostel, but that's cool. Within a Salvation Army hostel with, my chemist was a stone throw away from me. There was an off-license opposite, and because of the things that I did in my sprees and the lies and the destructions, I would have to run the gauntlet every morning to get to the chemist to pick up my methadone, which consisted of waking up, half a bottle of Frosty Jacks out the back door, not the front door, because I'd done something the night before in my spree, to get to the chemist, get my methadone, and then get a can of high-strength lager. And that was just a get on with the rest of the day. It was pitiful. It was awful. So yeah, it was difficult to face life sober at that point, at that juncture. But I'd had periods of getting out of that and life was okay. However, I always did it again. I'll leave it there. Thanks.